Then there's several $100 million a year coming in from tobacco sales. So that was an ongoing revenue stream. The boy, that was also prophetic, I guess. Yeah, I think the idea was to sell that stream of revenue to an investor, like a bond. Someone would buy that stream for $1 billion, and then the state would, in effect, no longer get that revenue. So you're trading upfront money one time in exchange for the ongoing money. A lot of questions about the legality, whether there's even a market for that. Didn't go very far. So then the legislature disposed of that, and the bills they passed, it's always multiple bills, pretty similar. I mean, they did the shift, the federal money, cuts about the same, actually a little more cuts, but differently distributed. In other words, the legislature had, which is always the case, I mean, the governor proposes a series of cuts, the legislature a different series of cuts. And then tax increases. That was largely rolling back Jesse's tax cuts, was a series of things that the legislature did. So interestingly, I think fundamentally that was what the impasse was over, was borrow and spend or tax and spend, I guess, so however you want to frame that. But that was the fundamental big difference. As you know then, last year the governor vetoed, actually signed all the spending bills, which was rather than veto any or line item veto any, which was kind of typically which is done, and then vetoed the tax bill, and then unallotted the $1 billion basically, and the school shift is in another mechanism in order to balance the budget. As you know then, last week that was thrown out. So up to the current, here's, I should have put a time and date stamp, I think, on this one, because I think it's still kind of okay, but this is, I think, where we are. This was, now what this totals, it doesn't total what you were hearing before, because actually the legislature passed and the governor signed the bills last year. It had a number of things in that. In fact, some revenue increases. So from last year, there were some revenue, a couple $100 million of revenue increases from last year's bills. And then the bills that were already passed this year, then those factored into this. And then for the governor's basically proposing enacting then the unallotments he did. So that's kind of where this total graph came from. So you can see the shifts are still there, the federal money. They're not counting, neither the governor or the legislature are counting on that. You might have read about the $400 million that's kind of, will the Congress pass it in time, and that nobody's counting on getting that now. So that's kind of where the governor is, and this is kind of where this is the one that the bills the governor vetoed just a couple days ago. So it's, you can see it kind of lines up. The basic difference is that $400 million of taxes versus spending cuts. So that's kind of where we are today, I think. But it's always a little difficult at this point in the session, and usually it's never very good to speculate. So I'm going to right now destroy the slide in case. So that was this year. So now this is next year. So this is a play along at your table, if you'd like. And I've got two slides. One is the revenue slide. So if you're a tax and spend person in the audience, this is your slide. So the question is, which revenue? Remember now, the bogey is $7 billion. So we have to come up with $7 billion somewhere. So the question is, which revenue would you raise? And this is a kind of a summary of where the state gets most of its money. Most from the individual income tax. That's the primary source of funding for the state. Sales taxes, they used to be closer. Sales taxes have actually fallen as a percentage of the state budget in the last couple of decades. Couple of reasons. We haven't, it's basically a goods tax rather than a service tax heavily, and as we've shifted toward a service economy, it hasn't kept up with that change in the economy. And then also we have a very narrow sales tax in Minnesota, meaning we tax fewer things, but we tax them a lot. And so some of the proposals over the last decade or more have been to tax more things, but to lower the rate on that. Those have not been enacted. Corporate taxes, there actually have been proposals to lower that. I'm a fan of that. I think the Governor's Tax Commission that came out about a year and a half ago was proposing some fairly good changes. In fact, interestingly, the two DFL tax chairs have incorporated some of those proposals, did not get them enacted, but Representative Linchevsky from Bloomington and Senator Bach from Virginia, I think, is that. Statewide levy, a lot of people don't know that the state levies a property tax. And for schools, but it was part of the Ventura changes at the time, but they get about $1.5 billion for the 2 years. Sin taxes, those are the easy ones. Some people are talking about those now. We always raise those. That's cigarette and alcohol. You know, nobody wants to be for cigarettes or for alcohol, so it's easier to raise those taxes. So it's but I think if you look at it, it's $500 million. So it's not a lot of money when you're trying to solve a $7 billion problem. Fees and charges, those have actually pretty much doubled during the Plenty administration. So when my wife gets her speeding ticket, I always pause at this point, so because she never comes to hear me talk, but it's about half of that speeding ticket now is the increase in the fee, and the half is kind of what it used to be. The state's using that to fund much of the court system. Now they just increased the fees there. Then I throw in local property taxes because those are part of the overall mix. Cities, counties, cities, counties, Met Council, townships, mosquito control district raised, you can see, over $5 billion a year in property taxes. School property taxes are a smaller share. Remember, during the Ventura years, there was what's referred to as the school funding takeover. It's the state promised to assume a larger share of the funding for schools. Didn't last very long. So what's happened is that the sales taxes or the property taxes dropped pretty dramatically, about $1 billion a year when that happened. They're now actually over what those used to be because the state funding hasn't kept pace with that. So that's your if you're the tax and spend crowd, that's your slide to work from. Here's if you're a government is too big crowd, then this is your slide to work with. I use the same slides for whoever I'm talking to, so they work pretty well. This is the state budget. So remember, we're trying to come up with $7 billion, so you can do the mental math yourself about where you'd find that. Now, this is a pie chart you've probably never seen before because it's John's pie chart. This is a pie chart organized in the order of how difficult it is to cut. So if you'll notice at midnight there and going clockwise, the slice of the pie that's a little over $3 billion is debt service, veterans, and public safety. So this is the area that everyone has taken the pledge not to cut those areas. Even if they haven't taken the pledge, they're not going to cut any of those areas. So that $3 billion is off the table, unless you're really feeling anti-military at this point, which I don't think anybody does. Of course, during the Vietnam days, I'm used to that when I was in the military, but I think this days, I think rightfully so, we're supporting our service members. K-12, I listed next, about $15.5 billion, big chunk of the budget. Okay, that's traditionally been by far the largest. Very difficult, even if you wanted to cut K-12, it's very difficult to do that politically. And that's why I listed that as kind of second. Now, I will give you an easy one. Not easy, but if you want to extend the shift another year, you get $1 billion there. So, you know, if you want to do that as a strategy, now we're down to finding $6 billion, if you want to do that. So extend the one-time cut for the schools another year. Health and Human Services, you can see, is about 30% of the budget. Actually, much of the cuts in recent years have hit this area, and you've kind of seen the fallout of that, the GAMC difficulties and the difficulty of trying to cut that more. Even probably the most hard-hearted would be lucky to find $1 billion or $2 billion out of that, I think, with some fairly serious implications. And the reason is that Health and Human Services is not welfare.